Headliner Nation, how is the tight end position looking for you? Are you somebody that has one tight end, set it and forget it, you feel good every single week? Are you utilizing a couple of different guys, going with the matchups for whoever has the best opportunity every single week? Or are you on and off the waiver wire consistently? Whatever it may be, I've got a ton of tight end information for you today, so lock in, like the video, and let's make some lineup decisions for Week 15, starting on Thursday night with Atlanta and Tampa Bay. I can't list Kyle Pitts as a must start, but he's one of the closer fringe starts that I'm okay putting in my lineup. And because it's Thursday Night Football, I'm probably going to regret saying that. But over the last couple of games, Kyle Pitts looks really good with Kirk Cousins. He's got 18 targets, 13 receptions, and 172 receiving yards in the last 2 games. This isn't one of these matchups that are highly favorable for tight ends, but if he continues to see that much volume with Kirk Cousins, he has to be in our lineup. So it's up to you to trust your gut or to just stay away, but I feel like we have to play Kyle Pitts this week unless you have one of the must-start players. The healthier this Tampa Bay team gets, the less likely it is that Cade Otton's going to continue to get targets. He is a sit for me this week. It's a tough matchup. Atlanta allows the second fewest fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. But you've got Chris Godwin back. You still got Emeka Egbuka. Tez Johnson, and Mike Evans could be back very soon as well. Not sure yet if he'll be back this week. If he is, then we're absolutely off of Cade Otton. But even if it stands right now, I couldn't play him. Cleveland at Chicago, and Harold Fannin has been hot. He has been the tight end 10 and the tight end 1 now each of the last 2 weeks. On top of that, David Njoku is dealing with an injury. He caught his only target last week for a touchdown, but there is some potential he could end up missing this week, and if he does, Harold Fannin could end up seeing a ton of target from Shedeur Sanders, who has been his main connection since he took over at quarterback. Colston Loveland has at least 5 targets in 3 straight games now. The problem is, in back-to-back games, he has failed to reach 30 receiving yards. The big thing with Colston Loveland right now, with no Rome Odunze, is that we didn't see a high bump in his targets last week. He was about the same as he has been throughout the season. So he's still very reliant on the touchdown or the big play. Both of those things we know that he can do. So there is opportunity for Colston Loveland in a tough matchup against this Cleveland defense, but I can't put him as anything more than a fringe start. Baltimore at Cincinnati. Death, taxes, and tight ends scoring a ton of fantasy points against the Cincinnati Bengals. Something that they've done very often this season, as Cincinnati is still by a wide margin allowing the most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. The last time these two teams got together, it was Isaiah Likely that was the big playmaker. And over the last couple of weeks, he's been the big playmaker. So can you trust him again this week? Do you trust Mark Andrews to score a touchdown? I think Mark Andrews scoring a touchdown is absolutely in the cards. With the way Isaiah Likely is played, I would not be shocked if he sees the most volume. He would have touchdowns in back-to-back weeks if it weren't for the fact that he fumbled the ball out of the end zone a couple of weeks ago. So both of these guys have to be a fringe start because against Cincinnati, they both can be successful. I know Mike Gesicki was solid last week, but we're still waiting to hear about T. Higgins and whether or not he will clear the concussion protocol. But Mike Gesicki, Noah Fant, Tanner Hudson, they've got several guys rotating in and out at the tight end position. And this is not an easy matchup, as Baltimore is still allowing the 8th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. So this week, I would really like to bet on somebody else at the tight end position that we've seen it from more often this season than Gesicki. The Chargers in Kansas City, and the Oronde Gadsden hype, it was fun while it lasted, but it is completely disappeared. And now Kansas City, who allows the 6th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends, and is right now on the outside looking in at the playoffs in a must-win situation. Oronde Gadsden, for me, because of what we've seen as of recent, is not going to be worth a start, which probably means he's going to go off for a ton of points and everyone is going to absolutely hate it. The Chargers are allowing the 7th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends, but they just gave up a ton of yards to Dallas Goedert, and Travis Kelce needs to have a little bit of a revenge game. Last week was really the first week in a while that we've seen a pretty poor fantasy performance from him. If you own Dalton Kincaid, you have been waiting for weeks for him to make his return, and he finally did. And even though Dawson Knox kind of stole the show from him from an overall volume standpoint, not shocking against Cincinnati, Kincaid was still able to find the end zone. And that's why Dalton Kincaid is going to be my Harry's Clean It Up tight end of the week, because this matchup going up against New England, who's currently allowing the 9th most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends, is really a must spot for Dalton Kincaid in our fantasy lineups. Dalton Kincaid has 5 touchdowns on the season, and this is a great opportunity this week against New England to add to that number. And maybe Dawson Knox gets involved again. Heck, he should, because the wide receivers have been a complete letdown in Buffalo so far this season. But Dawson Knox has not done it consistently, while we still have seen scoring consistency from Dalton Kincaid when he's healthy. So I'm going to go with Kincaid this week, and if for some reason Dawson Knox continues to show fantasy relevancy, then we will reevaluate him for the rest of the playoffs. A couple of weeks ago, when I went clean shaven for the first time in 4 years, Harry's came in clutch by giving me the best shave that I have had in quite some time. And if you want to try out Harry's right now and get the best shave that you have recently, do it right now. Code Headliners over at Harry's.com, and you can get their Harry's Plus trial set for only $10. And not only that, but Harry's has tons of products that you can give as stocking stuffers or wrapping up under the tree for everyone in your life. So make sure you head on over to Harry's, get your trial set for only $10, and peek around on the website and see what else you can also bring home this holiday season for everyone else around you. Hunter Henry with back-to-back top 12 weeks, but I told you a couple of weeks ago, I don't care. Hunter Henry could be a top 12 tight end for the rest of the season. He's not going to find his way into my lineup, because this is what he does. He'll have some big games, like earlier in the season when he was the tight end 1 and the tight end 8 in back-to-back weeks, but then he completely disappears in this offense, just like he did. Tight end 26, 33, 25, 15, 21, and 44. That's exactly what you get from Hunter Henry. Right now, there is some upside in playing him, but I feel like there's far too many options that give you a safer floor that we should be relying on. Washington and the New York Giants, and for Ben Sinnott, he's going to get an opportunity to show why he was drafted in the 2nd round. After Zach Ertz went down with an ACL injury, Ben Sinnott will likely be the tight end 1 the rest of the season, and he gets a solid matchup to start. The Giants are allowing the 9th most fantasy points per game, but I'm only going to go with Ben Sinnott if you absolutely do not have any other options. I want to see it before I believe it. Terry McLaurin is healthy. Deebo Samuel is healthy. They're getting healthier on this team. And yeah, Zach Ertz did fabulous at times this season, but I got to see Ben Sinnott put together a good opportunity and a good matchup before I can go out there and start playing him on a weekly basis. So keep an eye on him this week. Maybe he brings fantasy value later in the playoffs, but for now, I'm going to look towards some better options. Theo Johnson gets a solid matchup going up against the Commanders, who are currently allowing the 5th most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. He's been a little inconsistent as of late, but we've seen a top 12 upside more times than not over the last 5 weeks. He's been the tight end 10, 11, and 8. Unfortunately, he's had a tight end 20 and 24 performance as well. But coming out of the bye this week in a solid matchup, my hope is that Theo Johnson gets more than enough volume to find himself inside the top 12 again. Brock Bowers right now is one of those tight ends that you just have to play and pray. You can't sit him unless you have like Trey McBride, but every time you play him, because of the way Las Vegas has played this season, you probably don't feel great about it. He's been solid at least, and let's hope that he keeps that up, but it would be great to find a more consistent ceiling with him in this matchup against Philadelphia, who allows the 4th fewest fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. The ceiling could be a little lower. Dallas Goedert had a big week last week. 10 targets, 8 receptions, 78 receiving yards. But in the weeks before that, he was the tight end 32, 34, and 30. He only had 5 targets, 2 targets, 4 targets, and he only had 2 catches in each of those 3 games. He just hasn't shown a ton of consistency. We know that he can have really big games, and maybe this week will be one of those games. But Las Vegas does allow the 3rd fewest fantasy points to opposing tight ends. I think we see a little bit more running this week with Saquon Barkley, and maybe the passing game takes a little bit of a back seat once again. Mason Taylor has a really solid matchup. Jacksonville's allowing the 4th most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends, and I couldn't care less. I'm not playing Mason Taylor. For whatever reason, the Jets don't even want to get him involved. Last week, he led the team in receiving. That's great, but for a majority of the year, he's completely forgotten. a complete malpractice by the Jets offense. Britton Strange, after a couple of really good performances, just didn't get it done last week. Hopefully this week against the New York Jets, he can get back on track. But based on how he's played since returning from injury, he's got to be a start for me because I do think he's one of the better tight end options right now. Arizona at Houston, and it doesn't matter, you play Trey McBride. It's definitely not a great matchup, and it's not one that presents a ton of upside for him. But you got to bet that Trey McBride is probably going to have the most targets on the team once again and still has touchdown potential, with Jacoby Brissett being the starter for the rest of the season. Dalton Schultz has been pretty fantasy irrelevant the last 3 weeks. Now, a couple of weeks ago, he was the tight end 13. Going up against Indianapolis, he had 8 targets and he caught 7 of them, but he only had 55 yards. But on either side of that, he was the tight end 23 last week. He was the tight end 46 the week before. Since CJ Stroud has come back, he hasn't really had the same type of upside that we saw with Davis Mills there for a few games. So for Dalton Schultz right now, I'm going to leave him as a fringe start because it is a really solid matchup as the Cardinals allow the 8th most fantasy points per game. Just know that he's very, very wide when it comes to his range of outcomes. Green Bay at Denver, and we're going to make this one quick. There's really nothing to see here from Luke Musgrave or Evan Ingram. If you're even considering either of these guys, your fantasy season, unfortunately, is probably coming to an end. Luke Musgrave and Evan Ingram are not fantasy viable, are nowhere near my lineup. Both should be on the waivers, and now that I've said this about them, they're both probably going to have huge games. I'm also staying away from the tight ends and the Lions and Rams matchup. I'm not looking towards a guy like Ross Dwelley to try and anchor my tight end position. And Brock Wright, he's going to be questionable yet again. They are dealing with a ton of injuries at tight end right now. For the Rams, I mean, Detroit allows the 10th fewest fantasy points per game to the opposing tight end position. It's because Jack Campbell and Alex Anzalone are so good in coverage against those tight ends. Tyler Higbee, Colby Parkinson, anybody else that they offer, I'm going to go ahead and stay away from them and bank on the big passes in the red zone to go to the wide receivers. Carolina at New Orleans, and really the only guy we're going to focus on here is Juwan Johnson. Right now, Carolina is allowing the 10th most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. And Juwan Johnson didn't have a great day last week, but he continues to get a lot of targets. He's getting at least 4 targets per game in every single game since week 7, and he's gone as high as 9 and 7 targets as well. He's one of the more heavily utilized tight ends in all of football right now. So I'm going to list him as a start in a really solid matchup this week, especially given the fact that Carolina is way more difficult to pass against when it comes to the wide receivers. So maybe the wide receivers take a little bit of a step back and Juwan Johnson gets back into the spotlight. Since George Kittle returned from his injury, he has 4 games inside the top 6 quarterbacks. And even right before the bye, he had a pretty solid day. He caught 4 of his 5 targets for 67 yards. It didn't get him inside the top 12 tight ends, but it was still a fairly solid floor. And with his boy Brock Purdy at quarterback, you can bet once again that George Kittle is going to see a fair amount of targets this week and still have touchdown potential. Tyler Warren is a huge question mark this week, but for 2 reasons, I am still going to list him as a start, regardless of who plays at quarterback. The first reason why is this is a solid matchup. Going up against Seattle, really the biggest part of their defense that you can attack is with the tight end position, because Tyler Warren going up against this team that allows the 2nd most fantasy points per game could absolutely be the number 1 target for anybody that ends up starting at the quarterback position. But number 2, Tyler Warren is utilized way more different than a lot of other tight ends in the league. He gets snaps in the backfield. They do end arounds with him. They do QB keepers, things like that. A lot of things that he did while he was at Penn State, they continue to implement this year. So it wouldn't be shocking in a matchup that's going to be tough with a quarterback situation that isn't what we would like if they don't try to mix and match a few trick plays with Tyler Warren to keep things fresh, to keep the defense off balance, and hopefully give Tyler Warren decent fantasy floor. It's a solid matchup for AJ Barner. Indianapolis is allowing the 7th most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends, but he hasn't been inside the top 20 tight ends in 4 of his last 5 games. And not only that, Sam Darnold really hasn't been playing all that well the last few weeks, so for this matchup, I would rather not risk it. Minnesota at Dallas, and I think a lot of people are going to gravitate towards the Minnesota tight ends after the performances they gave us last week. And that would make sense, especially considering the fact that one of the first things I saw on Twitter is about how JJ McCarthy went back to his Michigan roots and started targeting the tight end position way more often. And heck, if that's what he has to do to play the way he did last week, then absolutely do it. But that's only 1 week, and the tight end position has been a wasteland for Minnesota this year. So this time in the playoffs, when we haven't seen anything from this team from the tight end position basically all season long, why would we risk it here, and why wouldn't we just go with some other options that have given us solid performances, especially as of late, and look at their floor instead of what the ceiling could be here? Yeah, Jake Ferguson isn't doing a ton in terms of fantasy output, but the targets are there. When you take a look at his last 5 games, in 2 of those 5 games, he has 7 targets. In 4 of those 5 games, he has 6 or more targets, and in all 5 of those games, he has 5 or more targets. In the last 4 weeks, he has 3 games inside the top 12 tight ends. So again, he's doing a decent amount, but it just doesn't feel like he's the main guy that they're looking at. But this week, a lot of it could come down to whether or not CeeDee Lamb ends up being cleared from the concussion protocol. If he isn't, then Jake Ferguson would go from fringe start to start. Miami at Pittsburgh is going to give us a couple of solid matchups at the tight end position, because right now Pittsburgh is allowing the 6th most fantasy points per game to tight ends. Miami is allowing the 3rd most fantasy points per game to tight ends. I'll go ahead and risk it with Darren Waller this week. It is risk though. He is not safe. You are playing him for his upside and understanding that his floor probably isn't all that great. On the other side of the field though, for Pat Freiermuth, I'm going to list him as a fringe start as long as Darnell Washington doesn't play this week. If Washington can't go this week, then I would put Pat Freiermuth as a fringe start because of his touchdown potential in this matchup against Miami. Headliner Nation, hopefully you're doing well at the tight end position. It has been one of the best years in a while for tight end scoring, but that doesn't mean that it still doesn't give us heartburn every single week if you don't have one of the top guys. So do me a favor, before you get out of here, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you're new here. If you don't have notifications turned on, hit that bell for us right now so you know whenever we drop new content or go live. And of course, leave some comments down below. But for now, Headliner Nation, stay safe and healthy, and I'll catch you on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.